interviewing people about what had happened to them in Lucknow. Now this, I have to say this was a very moving experience for me. I was quite new in Lucknow, I didn't know many people. Almost the first thing that happened was Papaji said, go off and make this film. So I stood up in satsang after Papaji had left and said, I'm making this film. I'd like to talk to anybody who's had a major transformative experience in Papaji's presence. I've no idea who you are, how many people there are, but I've arranged to take the camera crew to Peter Gordon's house. He had a nice big garden downtown Lucknow. I said, anybody who wants to come there at 2 o'clock and we'll record your story. And I went down there, and it was like first day of a bargain sale. There was a huge queue of people. I just didn't realise just how many people who sat in that room had had such an amazing experience. So, you know, we all sat there one by one. People got into the hot seat. I had no idea who they were. I had to ask, what's your name? Who are you? I've never seen you before, so please tell me your story. And I think we started about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We were using this quite expensive 3/4-inch film, so we shot continuously for, I think, 4 hours till it went dark. And I was absolutely astonished at how many people had come there, had a major revelation. They'd somehow been touched by the truth. Something had settled inside them, is possibly a good way of saying it. They'd become aware of who they were in that particular moment. They'd dropped their sense of individual identity, their idea that they were a particular person. And they had this very convincing way of speaking about it in public. This is something that I also found quite astonishing. I've been at that point I'd been in India for 25 years. I'd read all the spiritual books, I knew the language, I've read the classical advited texts, the scriptures, I'd read all the guru material. So I knew how these gurus speak, I knew how the Upanishads spoke. I had a good background in this. Some of these people in Lucknow, they just got off the plane. They hadn't read any of this stuff, and yet they could sit down, and I'd say, okay, talk, and they talked like this is chapter 3 of the Upanishads. There was just this absolute authority, this inherent, I know the truth, and I'm going to talk to you about what it's like to be in that truth. And it was astoundingly convincing, the way they described things in the same way that whole generations of sages had described scriptures going back 2,000-3,000 years, had used the same analogies, the same way of expressing themselves. And they were doing it completely freshly. They were just looking at themselves, feeling this experience, and saying, this is the truth, this is what happened to me, this is what it's like now. I found that to be astonishing, that people who, with very little background, very little experience, very little practice, could come into the presence of someone like Papaji. He could look at them, he could possibly tell them to look at their own self, he might tell them to do a bit of self-inquiry. But it wasn't, go away and do this practice, and maybe in 10 years something good will happen to you. He would say, find out who you are in this moment now, while you're sitting here in front of me. He might do it in a joking way, he might do it in a serious way, he might make you look at the eye and try and see where it comes from. Every person had a slightly different trick, a different way of wiggling his way inside you to make you see this point. And so many people, after 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, their face would just light up, they'd got it in that moment. And several years later, Papaji just casually remarked, he said, I just love seeing it when that moment happens. He said, I see it as streams of light coming out of people's head. I mean, enlightenment really does mean light in this sense. He said, you look at a person who has just dropped this sense of I, this sense of being limited to a particular body, and your whole subtle body explodes. You have this kind of this absolute radiation of light beaming out of you. And he said that's such a gorgeous sight to see somebody find that moment, find that truth in themselves, and then to watch their whole being kind of explode in light and to see the happiness on their face. And it was happening when I first went there, again and again and again. These weren't the very rare, the very advanced. These were ordinary people. Okay, they'd come to India looking for the truth. They wanted it. They wanted a guru. They wanted to hear the teachings. But they were, in many ways, no different from thousands and thousands of people you find in spiritual groups, spiritual centres all over the world. Something called them to India. Circumstances put them in front of Papaji, and he could just look at them. He could say a word. He could have a 5-minute conversation, and then these people would experience that state that other people try for several lifetimes to get and don't succeed. That was his massive, massive talent.